In this video, we're going to present our second partial project. This project will talk about exponential functions and their applications to real-life situations. In this video, also we're going to present some examples of exponential growth and exponential decay. Exponential functions. There are two types of exponential functions: exponential growth and exponential decay. All exponential functions are represented by the same equation, y equals b to the x power. A characteristic point that passes through the point 0, 1, a range that goes to 0 to infinity, a domain that goes to negative infinity to infinity. Also, the graph can go up or down, and that depends that if it is increasing or decreasing, with a restrictions that a needs to be greater than 0 and a can equal 1.
The formula for exponential growth and decay is A equals P times E to the power of RT. It allows us to keep track and predict either the growth or the decay of anything that is changing continuously. The equation for the graph is x equals 1/3 to the power of minus x. What are the main characteristics of exponential growth? Well, first of all, what are the variables? The final amount is what you're left with, which will be A, while P is the initial amount you started with or invested. R is the rate or the percentage, and in this case the percentage would be divided by 100 inside the equation, which the product is either decaying or growing. And T finally is the time that has passed since the initial start. E is simply Euler's number, which is a part of the equation for it to actually work. And exponential decay is the equation in process, and it's actually the exact same as exponential growth, but the concept of it is a complete opposite. In exponential decay, the rate is negative, which means that over time the initial will be decreasing and eventually will get to 0, while exponential growth is gonna keep going. There are also many other ways to exemplify exponential growth. Let's take the population of Jacksonville for example. In 2007, the population of Jacksonville was 3,810. And we want to know how big is it going to be in 13 years in 2020. Well, we know that it's growing at an annual rate of 3.5%. So what we have to do is convert the growth from percent to a decimal. Substitute growth factor into the equation and substitute the initial population and time. And at the end, all we have to do is solve. We get the answer 5,958 people. So that's the amount of people that's going to be in Jacksonville by the time of 2020. Another example would be the population of rabbits. Rabbits have a tendency of growing extremely fast. For example, we have 5 rabbits, and in a matter of 1 year, they duplicate their whole population. In the beginning, we only have 5 rabbits. After a whole year, we're going to have 10 rabbits. After 2 whole years, we're going to have 20 rabbits, then 40, then 80. And the way the equation works is the final population equals to the initial amount of rabbits that we had, which was 5, times 2, because the population of the rabbits is duplicating. So it's 2 to the power of the time, which, depending on how many years have passed, you input. Example of exponential decay will be, in real life, there was a law proposed for restaurants to be mandated to decrease sodium levels by 2.5% annually. That will mean to decrease their use of salt. So let's say if all restaurants have 5 million grams of salt in a year, in our initial year. In a year, they will have 4.875 million grams. Then in 2 years, 4.753, then 4.634, then 4.518, and so on and so forth. Let's say we have a tennis tournament with 64 competitors. Each round is going to be our time frame, and each round 2 players are going to get knocked off. So the first round is going to have 64 players. The second one is going to have 32. The third is going to end up with 16, 8, 4, and then 2, and then finally the grand final, which is going to only leave 1. This is an example of exponential decay because as time goes by, there's going to be less and less players until there's only 1 left. To this day, we're still suffering from the damages done by this explosion. The amount of radioactivity that we were exposed to was 10 times bigger than the one done by Hiroshima, a nuclear bomb which destroyed almost an entire civilization. So you can imagine how notorious that is. The radioactivity that was inside that nuclear plant spread all around the world. That includes the air we breathe, the water, the plants, and including the wildlife, making them dangerous to touch or even come in contact with. The accident could have been very easily prevented, since it was caused by a mixture of poor design and human error. If the design had been better and the employees had been better trained and more aware of the correct protocol to follow, it probably wouldn't have happened. Once the explosion happened, there really was no possible way of stopping it from spreading, especially because it was spontaneous and no one saw it coming. Though there is a way that the damage caused to be maintained a minimum, which was to have people in polluted areas wear protective gear from radiation. The explosion was in Ukraine, so it would have been very hard for it to have actually reached Mexico. It hasn't been possible to contain nuclear energy and substances generated by the explosion because most nuclear and substances that lie in Chernobyl since the 1986 accident, it has been impossible for experts to remove the substances because of their high radioactivity. It would have taken a long amount of time to remove all of the substances, and if they are removed, these substances will go up into the atmosphere, affecting when they are removed. These substances will also affect our planet. Scientific experts have decided not to do anything for the moment in the last years. Instead, they have been researching and coming up with new ways of cleaning up all of this radioactivity, so that one day we can make Chernobyl a place that can be lived again. Nuclear energy is very dangerous and also very expensive. Regular people are never really aware of the pollution it causes since it is invisible. But just because you can't see it does not mean it's clean. Also, the fact that it can create mass weapons of destruction is a threat to everyone, everywhere. If nuclear energy is available, so are these weapons, which have completely destroyed civilizations in the past and are still suffering from the consequences to this day. Nuclear energy reaction generates an exponential growth of atoms because nuclear energy has uranium in it. Exposure to uranium can result in both chemical and radiological toxicity. The main chemical effect associated with exposure to uranium and its compounds is kidney toxicity. This toxicity can be caused by breathing air containing uranium dust or by eating substances that contain uranium, but then enters the bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream, the uranium compounds are filtered by the kidneys, where they can cause damage to the kidney cells. Very high uranium intakes can cause acute kidney failure and also even death. The primary radiation health effect of concern is an increased probability of the exposed individual developing cancer during their lifetime. Prior to this investigation, though we believed it was most likely, we were not 100% sure if there was a nuclear plant here in Mexico. But after some research, we found out that there actually is one, and it is located in Alto Lucero, Veracruz. We believe, though the place itself is safe, it is located right in the Bay of Mexico, right beside the Gulf, which means there is some risk of natural disaster happening, especially one involved with water, whether it be a hurricane or whatever. We don't agree with the fact that there is a nuclear plant in our country, since there is far more risk than reward. It only manages 3% of our country's energy, and the country won't even suffer from losing this plant, since the CFE, which also manages the country's electricity, has a 40% leftover power. So that means that it has 40% power remaining. So it could easily replace the nuclear plant that we have. The April of 1986 disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Ukraine was the product of a flawed Soviet reactor design coupled with serious mistakes made by plant operators. It was a direct consequence of Cold War isolation and the resulting lack of any safety culture. The resulting steam explosion and fires released at least 5% of the radioactive reactor core into the atmosphere and downwind. 2 Chernobyl plant workers died on the night of the accident, and a further 28 people died within a few weeks as a result of acute radiation poisoning. Apart from increased thyroid cancers, there is technically no evidence of any major public health impact attribute to radiation exposure 20 years after the incident. Resettlement of areas from which people were relocated is ongoing. In 2011, Chernobyl was officially declared a tourist attraction for everyone to see.